Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and today I have an awesome video for you because we are going to be overclocking AMD's Ryzen 7 9800X3D, and it is the first time that we've been able to overclock a 3D V-cache processor because AMD has moved the 3D V-cache from on top of the cores to underneath them. So we've got a whole load more thermal headroom to play with, and we can hopefully get a few hundred more megahertz out of this processor compared to its boosting frequencies. And more importantly today, this is a very simple overclocking guide. We are going to be tweaking just a couple of settings, nothing complicated. It takes less than 5 minutes. The overclock is perfectly safe and stable to do. And what this isn't is a in-depth overclocking guide about how to get the very most out of your processor, spending an entire weekend tweaking things with dozens and dozens of different settings. That might be the most efficient way to do it, but that's not what this video is about here today. It's guiding someone who's probably never overclocked before into overclocking their Ryzen processor and seeing more performance for free, which is what overclocking is meant to be about anyway. So if you want the more detailed guides, there are plenty out there on YouTube using Curve Optimizer, Precision Boost Overdrive, all that kind of stuff. That's not what we're doing here today. So thanks to AMD for sending over the 9800X3D, and also thanks to MSI for sponsoring today's video and sending over the MPG X870E Carbon Wi-Fi, which is a fantastic socket AM5 motherboard. You can see links to all of the hardware that we've used today and also the software that we'll be using later on in the video down in the description below. Don't forget to check that out. And finally, before we get moving, I would like to thank you for watching today's video and also ask you to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you're notified when I upload new videos. And also, when it comes to liking and commenting, really helpful to me here on the channel. If you could just hit the like button and drop a comment down below, just helps punch me through the algorithm and gets me noticed. So that's it for the intro. Let's get cracking. Right, so the next step is to download all the software that we need, and we're going to be running a few bits of software today that is free to download, and you can see the links to everything in the description below, as well as a whole load of other interesting stuff. So first and foremost, we have CPU-Z, which is this bit of software here, and what we have on this bit of software is the core speed or frequency readout. There's a whole load of other cool stuff in this bit of software as well. You can find out your motherboard make and model and the BIOS version. You can check your memory speed, etc, etc. We are going to be focusing on the core speed down here, and a neat little trick that you can do in CPU-Z and the core speed is right click and it shows you the frequency of every core on your processor at that moment. And you can see that the frequencies are changing and all that kind of stuff. And that's very important because we want to double check the fruits of our efforts and make sure that our frequencies are locked in, and or that we're actually seeing an increase in the frequencies, whether it's the single core boost, which is generally a little bit higher, or the all core boost. And those two things will be going into a little bit more detail in a moment. So that's CPU-Z. And then we have AMD's Ryzen Master, which is the green software in the background, and primarily using this for the temperature for the moment, but we will be inputting our overclocking settings into this software before transferring those settings over to the BIOS later on. So that's free to download from AMD, and then in the background here we're going to be using Cinebench R23, and the reason why I'm not using the more recent R24 version is that it can take quite a while to run. So in the interests of just making this video as quickly and easily as possible, I've opted for R23, which is pretty much the same thing, just uses a slightly different, more demanding benchmark. So the first thing we need to do before we run any tests is to switch from the standard mode to the advanced benchmark mode. And basically what that will mean is that it's forcing it to produce a score and just run a single run of the benchmark, which is exactly what we want. And then what we want to do is check the temperature, which is up here in Ryzen Master. We ideally want this to be well south of 90 degrees because otherwise that won't leave us a lot of headroom for overclocking. And then we also want to check the frequencies in here. So we're going to start off running the single core test because that will give us an idea of what the single boost frequency or single core boost frequency is, or the peak boost frequency of our processor, and then we can see later on if that has increased. So we're going to go ahead and run the single core test, quickly go back to Ryzen Master and CPU-Z and see what the frequencies are in our test. So we've got a peak single core boost here of 5.2 gigahertz or thereabouts. So a little bit higher, but that's pretty much all we need. You won't see particularly high temperatures here because obviously we're only loading one core, but you might see that core bounce around as well between different cores. But for the moment, it is sticking to 5.2 gigahertz of maximum on those cores. So we can go ahead back to Cinebench and just stop that benchmark. Now's the big one because we're going to be loading all cores at the same time. So we'll probably end up with a roughly similar frequency and much higher temperatures as well. So we want to just click start on that benchmark and then again quickly load up Ryzen Master and CPU-Z. And then we're going to go back and double check that everything is running and what everything is looking like. So we're looking at pretty much the same frequency actually. So we've got a frequency of 5.2 gigahertz for the peak single core boost and the all core boost. So hopefully we can increase one or both of those with our tweaking. Now the temperature, obviously very important. We're looking at a peak temperature here of just under 70 degrees C. So we've only been running the benchmark for 30 seconds a minute or something by now. It probably won't go that much higher than this because we've already kind of plateaued here. So we've got a score here as well of 23,193 points. So I'm just going to run that benchmark again very quickly just so we can double check the temperatures. You can run the extended stress test or the minimum test duration. You can actually click on that and run a longer stress test if you're worried about temperatures. But if you're only hitting 70 degrees C, after running the benchmark for a little while, up to 71, and it's kind of sticking around that temperature, it's not going up by, multiple degrees in every step, then generally you're okay. You don't need to worry too much about it. We are sitting at around 71. After another 5 minutes or something, it might get up to 72, but that's pretty much what we're looking at. So I'm just going to let this run through and get the score again. So again, we started off boosting up to around 5.2 gigahertz across all those cores. We got to about 70 or 69 degrees C, and that rose to 71 on the second stress test. So I have no qualms about temperatures here whatsoever. And 23,139 being our point. So we definitely want to increase that result as well. And what we will be doing is also running a game test, and we'll be comparing the results of that a little later on as well. Now, the overclock that we're going to be doing to start with is simply enabling AMD automatic overclocking. And what this means is that we can increase the boost override to 200 megahertz. So hopefully we can see a sizable increase in the frequencies that we're going to be boosting to. And then we can rerun the stress test and check the temperatures and see what scores we've got. So remember that score there, we've got 23,139, but I will be repeating that later on. So this is going to see the impact of just automatic overclocking. So this isn't really a manual overclock. We're going to be doing that in a minute, but just a very quick and easy way of getting more performance for free. So we're going to click apply now, and Ryzen Master needs to restart our system in order to do this. So you can let that go through and do its thing. And then once the system is restarted, Ryzen Master will pop up again asking you if you want to apply the settings. You just click yes, and you'll be back at the Ryzen Master screen. Okay, so we are back in Windows then, having applied our tweaking, and we're now going to check what frequency boosts we have or we can expect given the automatic overclocking settings that we've applied. So first and foremost, we are going to run the single core test in Cinebench to see what the single core boost frequency has increased to. So we're going to run that now and make sure to set the advanced benchmark just so we can have a quick look at these things. And a pretty sizable increase here. So we've got a couple of cores actually running at 5.4 gigahertz. So that's a good 200 megahertz higher than what we saw earlier at stock speed. So that's going to have a pretty big impact on lightly threaded workloads. Hopefully we'll see some gaming performance increases as well. And what we'll do now is stop that test because we need to check out the multi-core increases as well in terms of frequency and performance. And we're going to load Ryzen Master with this one because we want to check the temperatures as well, because we've now increased things a little bit. So let's run that multi-core test, and we'll get a score in a moment as well. Bring Ryzen Master up and see what the temperatures are. So the boosting here, nowhere near as much as we saw with the single core test with lightly threaded workloads. We've got maybe a 50 megahertz boost at most. So we're, maximum I think I saw there was about 5.25 gigahertz. So not a massive increase. So the score is probably not going to be that much larger. In terms of temperatures, they have gone up a fair bit, but not catastrophically so. We're still looking at around 75, well, not 75, up to 79 degrees, and pretty much stable there. We were at about 71 before, so not a huge increase in terms of cooling, but a lot of this will depend on your actual cooling system. So in terms of points, we've added maybe 200 points or so to the score, so not a massive increase, but we'll be looking at some comparative numbers for benchmarking later on in some game tests, because I think that single core test will prove to be a lot more fruitful given that it's about 4 times larger. So what we'll do now is move on to the manual overclock. Okay, so now moving on to something slightly more exciting and rewarding, and that is a manual overclock. So to start with, what you'll need to do is reset everything that you've done with the automatic overclocking. If you've done that already, that is a completely separate thing. If you just want a one-click thing, get a bit of a boost, that is the way to go, and we'll be looking at the benchmark results of both of these things later on. We've already looked at the Cinebench, but I want to see how it affects gaming performance as well. Now, though, you'll need to just reset the profile, which I've already done here by clicking on the button down below, and probably just a good idea to restart your PC and just double check your memory is still running at its rated frequency as well, because I found a couple of times when I've restarted after Ryzen Master, it's knocked my memory back from its XMP or AMD Expo speed of 6000 megahertz all the way back to 4800 or something like that. So just make sure when you restart that the memory is set at the correct speed, and then boot into Windows, and then we can click on the manual section in Ryzen Master. So the first thing you need to do is up here, click on the CCD drop down, and then you will also need to click on this little red dot over here, which means that we want to synchronize all of the cores. So I'm going to click on that now, and that means that when we type in our figure over here, which we're going to aim for, it will apply to all of the cores, which is what we want. So we're going to do that right now, and the speed that we are looking for is 5500, so 5.5 gigahertz. And if you press tab on your keyboard, it will automatically apply that speed across all of the cores. So this is significant because not only is it 100 megahertz faster than the fastest single core speed, or the fastest speed we saw at all using the automatic overclocking function, it is also 300 megahertz faster than everything that we saw in the multi-core boost as well at stock speed, and indeed using automatic overclocking, because automatic overclocking didn't really increase performance that much. So hopefully what this will do is offer up a much faster result for the multi-core test, and will have a significant impact on gaming performance as well. So what I'm going to do now is click apply. And you don't need to restart when you're doing a manual overclock. This is already applied now, and to double check that, we're going to load CPU-Z, and as we can see here, 5.5 gigahertz, or pretty close to it, is enabled across all of the 8 cores. So we are locked in, we are ready to go, and apart from one other thing, which is the voltage. So I've tried and tested this all the way up to 1.25 volts, but I got all the way back down to 1.23 volts, and it was still perfectly stable, even quite a bit below this as well. So I just want to stick to 1.23 because I think that is kind of the sweet spot. It's going to be low enough that it's perfectly fine to run at this speed long term if that's what you want to do. And also it's enough to make sure that this overclock is completely stable. And to make sure it's stable, what we're going to do is run through a Cinebench test, and I will recommend that you do run a 10-minute stress test in Cinebench and go through everything that you do on your own PC that is relatively demanding. So Cinebench is pretty demanding, but for now we are going to leave that on off, and we are just going to run the multi-core test, because I've already made sure that this overclock is stable and it has plenty of room for those of you out there that don't end up getting quite as good CPU as I have. Not that I know that my processor is particularly good at overclocking, but we're going to run the multi-core test now, and then we are going to check out 2 things: the frequency, making sure that it stays at 5.5 or thereabouts, and it is, and we also need to check the temperatures. So what we've actually got here is actually a slightly lower temperature than we were dealing with earlier. We went all the way up to 81, and we're now running at 5.5 gigahertz with actually a noticeably lower temperature than we did when we had automatic overclocking enabled. So that will tend to increase all of the power taps. That is equally clunky as what we've got here, but we're actually dealing with lower thermals, less power going through the CPU than we had before. And as you can see, we've got a significantly higher result for the multi-core test as well. So 2400, 193. So we're up around 1,000 points on compared to where we were. So that's really, really good news. And what we'll do now is just go ahead and I'm going to do a gaming benchmark and we can talk about the results in a minute. But that is how you apply a manual overclock, and we're going to go ahead and do the gaming benchmark, and then we're going to go ahead and show you guys how to input these figures into your BIOS if you want to. So that's the next step. So here we have the benchmark results now then, and just reiterating the Cinebench results that we've already spoken about. You can see those in the graph, and you can pause this video if you want to take a closer look. And we also have the Cyberpunk test that we ran as well. So before and after stock speed and our 5.5 gigahertz overclock at 1080p with an RTX 4090, we saw a decent uplift in both the minimum 99th percentile and the average frame rate. Okay, so we need to head into our motherboard's BIOS or EFI, and to do that you need to tap the delete key when you're firing up your PC, and eventually you'll be met with a screen like this. And if you're using an MSI motherboard, we need to switch from easy mode at the top left here to advanced mode, and you can also do this by pressing F7 on your motherboard. If your BIOS screen doesn't look quite like this, you might have an older 600 series chipset motherboard, for example. So we're now in advanced mode, and we need to find the overclocking section, and then we need to make sure that OC Explore mode is set to expert, which it normally is once you go into overclocking mode. And here we have the CPU ratio apply mode. We need to make sure that's set to all core, and this was set to all core as standard, so I didn't need to change anything. And here we have the CPU ratio apply mode. So we need to change this to 55 to give us 5500 megahertz, which is what we plumbed into Ryzen Master. So that's all good. And that will apply it across all cores as well, because we've got that all core setting set up there. Next, we need to set the voltage, the CPU voltage. And as we can see here, it's already running at about 1.2 volts. We need to change this to override mode. Now, this is the most basic form of a manual overclock. You can use other modes such as offset and that kind of thing, and that might allow the voltage to kind of go up and down, but we're just starting with the basics here. So we're going to stick with a manual overclock, and then we want to type in the voltage that we used with Ryzen Master earlier, which is 1.235, and then just press tab or enter, and then that is it. So we are all set to go with our manual overclock, and then we're going to press F10 to go back into Windows. It will save our settings and we'll be good to go, and this will stick between reboots. So we've tested our motherboard and the overclock. We're in Windows with Ryzen Master. We've got our results from Cinebench, so we're now going to go back into Windows with our manual overclock applied. So what do we make of overclocking AMD's Ryzen 7 9800X3D then? Well, it turns out it's really, really simple. This processor does have a reasonable amount of headroom as well compared to its out-of-the-box boosting frequencies, and more importantly, we're actually sitting at a slightly lower voltage than I saw out of the box at stock speed once we've overclocked it, resulting in potentially lower temperatures in some systems as well. So it's a very overclockable CPU. You can definitely get more performance, so hopefully you enjoy today's video. And once again, this video is specifically for MSI Socket AM5 motherboards. It probably won't work on other manufacturers' motherboards, but you can give it a go, see what happens. If not, drop me a comment down below and I might be able to help. So thanks to AMD and MSI again for their help with today's video. That's it from me. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll be back very, very soon.